There are places that do not appear on official maps, even though everyone swears they exist. Places that have no recorded coordinates, no tourism markers, no historical plaques. And the unsettling part is not that they are abandoned, it is that they feel preserved, waiting, as if the land itself is holding its breath for someone to return. And before we go any further, consider something carefully. If a place can wait, then it does not need to chase. It only needs patience. Deep within the Appalachian Mountains, beyond the maintained trails and scenic overlooks, there is a stretch of forest locals avoid describing in detail. Not because they are superstitious, not because they believe in myths, but because too many ordinary explanations have failed there. When something cannot be explained enough times, it stops being a story and starts becoming a pattern. And patterns are dangerous, because once you see one, you cannot unsee it. For decades, hikers, hunters, and seasonal forestry workers have disappeared inside a specific pocket of terrain. Not randomly, not scattered across the mountain range, always within the same uneven boundary that covers only a few square miles. Search parties have combed the region repeatedly. Helicopters have scanned from above. Drones have mapped the canopy. Nothing definitive has ever been recovered. No campsites disturbed. No signs of struggle. No remains. If you are still listening right now, you already feel it. This is not chaos. This is consistency. Official reports attribute the disappearances to exposure, injury, disorientation. The Appalachian wilderness is vast and unforgiving, but the topographic data tells a quieter story. Compasses drift several degrees off center inside that zone. GPS signals fluctuate despite clear skies. Wildlife tracking cameras show animals abruptly changing direction near a particular ridgeline, as if reacting to something unseen. And on the rare occasions when someone has returned after spending an unplanned night inside that section, they never describe what happened clearly. They speak around it. They hesitate. They forget details that should be unforgettable. If cases like this are the reason you're here, make sure you're subscribed, because what you're about to hear is where the pattern becomes undeniable. That autumn arrived colder than expected. The temperature dropped weeks before forecast models predicted it would. Leaves fell early, blanketing the forest floor in a dense layer that muffled every footstep. The silence was the first noticeable difference. No insects, no bird calls, no distant rustling of small animals moving through brush. Even the wind behaved strangely. It did not flow steadily through the trees. It came in uneven pulses, brief exhalations that seemed to originate from no consistent direction. Trail 12B had been officially closed for nearly 5 years. A rusted sign warned of unstable terrain and potential rock slides, though no documented rock slide had ever occurred in that section. The sign leaned at an unnatural angle, as though it had been pushed from behind, rather than battered by weather from the front. The forest pressed close to it, branches overlapping the edges like fingers curling around metal. It began there. A 21-year-old media student had entered the trail alone to film a documentary about isolated Appalachian communities. His channel specialized in rural folklore and abandoned infrastructure. His last uploaded clip showed him standing at the mouth of Trail 12B, explaining that locals had refused to guide him any further. He laughed in the video. The sky behind him was clear. There was no visible danger. The footage cut abruptly 12 minutes later. No farewell, no explanation. Pause for a second and imagine that cut. No static, no scream, just absence. When he failed to return home, a search operation was launched within 48 hours. Volunteers from neighboring counties joined trained rescue teams. Thermal drones scanned the canopy at night. Dogs tracked his scent for nearly a mile before abruptly stopping near a shallow ravine. There were no skid marks on the leaves, no torn fabric, no dropped equipment. His camera bag was found upright against a tree, zipped closed, battery fully charged. If that detail unsettles you, press like right now. Not for the algorithm, but because your mind just tried to rationalize something that refuses to be rationalized. The forest in that area felt compressed, as if the air pressure subtly increased the deeper one walked. Team members reported mild headaches after several hours. 2 volunteers experienced nosebleeds without prior history. One ranger described hearing faint rhythmic tapping that stopped whenever he tried to pinpoint its source. None of these details made it into the official summary. By the 4th day, the organized search scaled back. Weather conditions worsened unexpectedly. Dense fog rolled in without appearing on radar predictions. The helicopters were grounded. Visibility dropped to less than 20 feet in some areas. Search leaders marked the ravine as the last confirmed point of contact and instructed teams not to advance further without aerial support. The fog did not lift the next morning. It settled instead. Not drifting, not thinning, simply existing between the trees, like a second layer of forest suspended in midair. Shapes moved at the edge of vision, dissolving when focused on directly. Footprints left in the leaf litter faded faster than they should have, edges softening within minutes, as though gently brushed away. The ravine itself was shallow, no more than 8 feet at its deepest point. Nothing about it justified a fatal fall. But soil samples taken days later revealed an unusual compaction pattern beneath the surface layer. The ground below was denser than surrounding earth, as if repeatedly pressed from underneath rather than above. Weeks passed. The official search ended. The student was declared missing. And here is where most stories would fade. But patterns do not fade. They repeat. Locals resumed their routines, but the silence around Trail 12B thickened. Hunters, who typically scouted the region in late fall, adjusted their routes without being prompted. An elderly resident who had lived near the foothills for over 60 years mentioned that the trees in that direction had begun shedding bark prematurely. No one investigated. Winter arrived abruptly. Snow covered the leaves, flattening the landscape into a blank white field, interrupted only by trunks and shadow. For a time, it seemed the forest had reset itself. The cold brought normalcy. Animal tracks reappeared along the outer edges. The air felt lighter. Then a park maintenance worker reported finding footprints in fresh snow leading toward the closed trail. The stride length matched that of an adult male. The tracks were barefoot. They began at the tree line. There were no inbound tracks. Take a moment to really picture that. Someone walks out of nothing. The impressions were deep, indicating full body weight. The gait was steady, not erratic. The feet did not veer off course. They moved directly toward the ravine and stopped at its edge. No signs of a fall, no disturbed snow beyond that final print, just a clean termination, as if the individual had stepped forward and ceased to exist. If you're still here, that means you feel it too. Stay with this. The report circulated briefly before being archived. Officials attributed the tracks to melting distortion, animal interference, misinterpretation. Spring thaw uncovered something else. Beneath the melted snow near the ravine, search teams discovered subtle depressions forming a near-perfect circle approximately 30 feet in diameter. The leaves inside that perimeter decomposed at a slower rate than those outside it. Soil temperature readings were marginally lower within the boundary, despite equal sun exposure. Vegetation struggled to grow evenly there. Biologists suggested fungal irregularities. Geologists suggested mineral deposits. None of the samples provided conclusive data. Over the following months, 3 additional individuals vanished within a 2-mile radius of the same location. An experienced backpacker, a freelance photographer, a local teenager familiar with the terrain since childhood. In each case, personal belongings were found intact. In each case, there were no signs of distress. In each case, weather conditions shifted rapidly within hours of the disappearance. Patterns became harder to ignore. And when patterns become visible, fear becomes quiet. Satellite imagery, reviewed retrospectively, revealed faint variations in canopy density over that circular zone. Trees appeared slightly shorter. Their growth rings, when later examined from fallen trunks nearby, indicated periodic stress occurring in consistent intervals, roughly every 7 to 9 years. Older residents began recalling incidents from decades earlier. Livestock found drained of blood without visible wounds. Hunting dogs refusing to pursue game beyond a certain ridge. Radios emitting static bursts at specific coordinates. These accounts had once been dismissed as rural exaggeration. Now they aligned too neatly. A private research group quietly requested access to the site. Their interest was framed as environmental study. They installed monitoring equipment along the perimeter of the circular depression, motion sensors, seismic readers, electromagnetic field detectors. For several weeks, data returned normal fluctuations. Then the readings spiked. Electromagnetic interference increased sharply for exactly 6 minutes and 43 seconds on a cloudless afternoon. Seismic sensors registered vibrations too shallow to qualify as tectonic activity, yet too rhythmic to be random. Motion detectors triggered simultaneously in a ring formation, as though something had moved along the boundary without entering or exiting. No visible disturbance accompanied the event. That night, a nearby cabin security camera captured a brief distortion in the tree line. Not movement, not light, a compression, as if the background had been pressed inward for a fraction of a second before returning to normal. The footage lasted less than 2 frames. 2 days later, one of the researchers failed to check in. His vehicle remained parked at the trailhead. His backpack was located beside the circular depression. Inside were notebooks filled with sketches of concentric patterns and repeated measurements of decreasing ambient sound levels. His final written entry consisted of a single observation: "The silence is not empty." And if that sentence stayed with you, you understand why this location was never reopened. After that, access to Trail 12B was permanently restricted. Barricades were installed. Official statements cited environmental hazards. Media coverage faded, but the forest did not return to normal. Over time, hikers traveling along adjacent approved routes began reporting a peculiar sensation when facing west toward the restricted zone. A pressure behind the eyes, a subtle ringing in the ears. The impression of being evaluated, not watched in the traditional sense. but measured. Bird migration patterns shifted slightly eastward over successive seasons. Tree growth on the outer edge of the circular boundary accelerated compared to interior samples. Soil composition analyses revealed microscopic fractures in root systems, as though subjected to repeated low-frequency vibration. The pattern continued. 7 years after the initial student disappearance, thermal imaging satellites detected a temporary temperature drop concentrated precisely within the 30-foot circle. The drop lasted under 10 minutes. It occurred at 3:17 a.m. No official response followed. Local folklore adapted quietly. Parents warned children not to chase stray balls toward the western tree line. Hunters marked new informal borders on personal maps. Conversations about the site grew shorter over time, not longer. Fear matured into avoidance. What unsettled investigators most was not evidence of violence, nor any predatory trace. It was the absence of chaos. Each disappearance lacked struggle, lacked disruption. As though the forest did not take people, it absorbed them. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted years later showed an anomaly beneath the circular zone extending deeper than expected bedrock layers. The data suggested a cavity or density fluctuation at a depth inconsistent with natural erosion patterns. Drilling was proposed. Funding was denied. The land remains undisturbed. Season after season, leaves fall over that circle. Snow blankets it. Rain saturates it. Sunlight filters through branches onto soil that resists explanation. And every several years, instruments malfunction briefly at that exact perimeter. Animals hesitate at its edge. The wind alters course in faint but measurable ways. The Appalachian Mountains have existed for hundreds of millions of years. Older than the Atlantic Ocean. Worn down, reshaped, patient. They have endured extinctions, continental shifts, human expansion. Whatever lies beneath that 30-foot circle has been there longer than any missing person report. Longer than the trail designation. Longer than memory. The unsettling possibility is not that something hunts within that forest. It is that something resides there. Something that does not need to move to exert influence. Something that does not announce itself with sound or shadow, but with subtraction, with silence, with the quiet reordering of matter. There are no warning signs visible from satellite view. No dramatic sinkholes swallowing hikers whole. No cinematic disturbances in the canopy. Just a boundary where systems falter and patterns repeat. Trail 12B remains closed. Maps still show forest, and somewhere inside a perfectly measured circle of trees, the silence continues to hold its shape, patient and intact, waiting for the next interval. And if patterns truly repeat, it may already be closer to the next one than anyone realizes.